Hello friends, welcome to the series Issues in World History 20th Century 1, in which we are talking about the various kinds of ideas concerning the world history, and in the last lecture we talked about modernity, and this is again the fourth lecture on modernity, where we will talk about the important aspects of modernity. In the last lecture we talked about the various theories which were being given by Giddens, etc., and how these theories they are concerned with modernity, various kinds of ideas or aspects which are concerned with modernity, they were also being talked about, and we find that these kinds of ideas or concepts, how they are related to the kind of society, was also being talked about in the last lecture, and how Beck and Giddens they talk about the idea of modernity and the idea of risks which are there in the contemporary society, that was also being talked about in our last lecture. And we find that these scholars they also in a way talk about, for example, Beck, who says that it is science and the scientists that are responsible and the protector of global contamination of nature and culture, and nature, and they in a way accuse the science and the scientists for being illogical as well. So we find that the scholars they have in a way argued that when you talk about the science and the scientists, and how the idea of rationality is in a way associated with them, and they have to be in a way seen to be the protector of the global contamination. No contamination should take place. It is their responsibility in the framework of the nature and the culture, and many times we find them they are seen to be logical as well. And when you talk about the classical industrial society, we find that the nature and culture they were the separate entities, and in the case of advanced modernity they go hand in hand and are deeply interlinked and interrelated to each other. And this linkage means that changes in either nature or culture feedback onto each other as well. And scholars like Beck they in a way talk about nature and society, how they are related to each other almost symbiotically, that how nature is taking and giving back to the society, similar manner society is also taking back and giving to the nature as well, and how they are in a way interdependent on each other, and this has led to the facts of nature being made political, and so scientists including the social scientists are now in domain of and being affected by politicization. And Beck also says that the governments are losing their powerful control because of the sub-political bodies like research institutes, and the subgroups of people are more responsive relative to government, and one can say that the advanced modernity has generated both hormone risks and also ways to deal with it. And scholars like Ritzer they evaluate the modern society using the concepts of hyper-rationality, McDonaldization and Americanization. And Ritzer has in a way pointed out that the concept of hyper-rationality draws heavily on rationality as conceptualized by Weber. For Weber, we live in an increasingly rational world. So, when we talk about these scholars and their ideas with regard to the idea of rationality and how they have been in a way also being equated with the idea of hyper rationality as has been done by Ritzer, and how he has also in a way connected it to McDonaldization and Americanization, where we find that it is also seen in the framework of a new kind of imperialism, where we find that McDonaldization and Americanization of various areas of the world is also taking place, and how this kind of homogenizing tendencies they would not be good for the entire society. We find that how people they are resorting to a culture which is concerned with McDonaldization, and also the kind of culture which is being promoted by the Americans, and how this kind of a culture could be seen in the various areas of the world. And we also talk about when you talk about hyper rationality, so we find that how it draws heavily on the rationality as it was being conceptualized by Weber, and Weber believed that we are living in a modern world and we are living in a rational world, and the formal rationality is seen to be used for system usage than Weber's other types of rationality: substantive, theoretical and practical. And we see that the formal rationality implies increasingly felt need and importance of institutions which force members to adhere to a strict code of behavior and conduct. So, we find that when one is talking about various kinds of rationalities, various types of rationality, as has been argued by Weber, we find that he talks about the substantive, theoretical and kinds which he says, and we also see that when you are talking about the formal rationality, it in a way also in a way implies the some kind of a need and the importance of the institutions as well, where we find that the members of that particular institution, they have to live in a within some kind of a code of behavior and conduct which they have to follow in that sense. And on the other hand, we find that the substantive rationality implies the dominance of the norms and the values in making of the rational choices. Thus, theoretical rationality deals with intellectual apprehension, and so in that sense we find that how substantive rationality is talking about those norms and the values in that sense in making of the rational choices. And on the other hand, one is talking about the practical rationality. It in a way defines the context of the situation so far as daily decisions are concerned. So, in that sense we find that practical rationality is taking into account the daily kind of a situation which is there, and how in a way when one is talking about this kind of a rationality situation or the context of the daily life, they become more important. And when you are talking about hyper rationality, how it goes beyond the formal rationality, because it will be hyper in nature, it is going beyond that. And so we find that the hyper rational system, it combines Weber's forms of rationality which include the formal rationality, substantive, intellectual and practical. So, we see that any kind of a system which is seen to be hyper rational system, it in a way will combine the kinds of or the types of rationality which have been given by Weber, whether it is formal, substantive, intellectual or practical. So, in that sense one has to in a way also understand the kind of context which is there and how it is also relevant from that point of view as well. And when one is talking about the idea of rationality and hyper rationality, we find that where there is a thin line between them, and also at the same time rationality, when it goes beyond, then we find that it is referred to as hyper rationality. And when you talk about this kind of a concept where we are talking about hyper rationality, it is being called because it uses and combines all four of Weber's forms of rationality. And when one is talking about the formal rationality, then four aspects of formal rationality are efficiency, predictability, quantity rather than quality, and the substitution of non-human for human technologies. So, we find that when one is talking about these kinds of aspects of formal rationality, then the issue of efficiency definitely is definitely there. Then that how one can be more and more in a way efficient in that sense, one can be more proficient in that sense, or the issue of predictability in that sense, that one is able to predict. Then quantity, when one is talking about formal rationality, then quantity definitely is important. And how the non-human for the human technologies will also take place in this kind of an aspect which is being talked about within the framework of the formal rationality. And when one talks about the various scholars, those who have in a way argued with regard to the idea of modernity, then we find that Ritzer indicates that this is a trend for all over modern world, where emphasis is on quick turnover for business. And in this context, credit cards, they were being examined by Ritzer, and he feels that each of the factors applied to McDonaldization are true for credit card industry as well, and loans are processed quickly as well. So we find that in modern society, the kind of changes which are coming, and through various kinds of activities or phenomena, we find that society is being understood, and Ritzer has seen this within the framework of the credit card industry, that how for the credit card industry loans are processed very easily, and how there is a lot of effort to provide credit cards to all the members of the society, that when once they will use the credit cards, once they will take the credit, then some kind of a chain or cycle will be created of debt, and then they will pay that debt as well, because credit cards will allow them to make purchases at that point of time when they are short of money or when they are short of cash, but they will be able to make that kind of a purchase, and then this kind of a habit of paying later will also develop. And also in that sense, we find that in a consumerist society, especially in today's society, how consumption becomes predictable in the credit card, and they come with different credit limits, and transactions are relatively dehumanizing in that sense, that many a times you are doing online transactions nowadays, and because of the online transactions we don't even know that the kind of purchase which has been made, which vendor is going to provide you the kind of product which you have ordered. So it becomes dehumanizing in that sense, and these kinds of purchases which are being done by the credit card are beneficial to this kind of an industry which is based in America, because many of the biggest credit card industries, they are based in America. So that kind of a culture is also being promoted. And when you talk about the credit cards, when one also talks about the other kinds of aspects which are concerned with the modern world, fast food industry is another, where we find that scholars like Ritzer, they argue that the Americanization of the modern society, which was evident in our discussion of the fast food restaurant and credit card usage as well, because all these kinds of aspects could be seen in the American society, where we find that the credit cards, they are being used, and the fast food restaurants, they are being promoted. People, they are not making fresh food in their homes, they are largely either eating from the fast foods or they are using the canned food, and because of which we find that many times, even when they do not have money, they are able to make those purchases because of the credit cards. And the issue of obesity is also being linked to it, that the kind of food which is being consumed in these kinds of societies, especially America, where obesity is one of the issues, or which has also been talked about. And we find that when one is talking about America, then it is being perceived as practicing or living in a modern world and engaged in construction of American way of life. And this American way of life has its own unique features, and credit card is one of them. And we find that when one is talking about the major credit card companies, they are largely based in America. Visa, MasterCard and American Express are major cards relative to those based in Britain, Barclay and Japan, JCB. And we find that all these big companies which are dealing with credit cards are based in America, and credit card companies are making a concerted effort to globalize the credit cards. And nowadays we find that the kind of offers which are being given on the credit cards, and how when people, they are using airports, for example, in terms of their flights, they are being given free access to the lounges which are being made there, and if you are holding a credit card, then you are being given this kind of a lounge access. Many companies, largely all of them, the credit card companies are providing you providing one such kind of facilities, so that people they take the credit cards as well. And we find that how credit cards they are also shaping, or in a way giving some kind of a thrust to the consumerist industry. And how credit cards and the fast food they are also in a way linked to each other, and they also are in a way reflect the specific world era. And apart from this, we also see that some of the scholars like Habermas, they have also talked about modernity, and their ideas are also linked to modernity. And Habermas has argued that modernity has yet to play itself out, and that many modern areas can be developed further before thinking of a post-modern world. And he says that modernity does have a number of paradoxes, and thus rationality that is part of the overall social system is contradictory in nature and conflictual, where we find that conflict is there with rationality of life world as a whole. And on the one hand, social systems they have multiplied their complexity and the use of the instrumental reason. And again we find that the live world has also multiplied its diversity in the terms of secularization in the processes of reflexivity. So these ideas of Habermas, where he talks about that how number of paradoxes which are there in modernity, and we find that how over a period of time the kind of changes which have come in the social systems, and because of which we find that there is a lot of contradiction and conflict with the rationality of live world as a whole. And we also see when one is talking about the rational society, that how Habermas, where he talks about the rational society is one where systems and the live world they exist together, living an intermeshed but parallel existence as well. And this conjoining and interaction leads to a stage in society of abundance, economically and environmental control, due to which rational systems being present and employed to their optimum. And the problem of the modern world is that now the systems they begin to exercise power or to colonize the live world as well. So many times we find that this leads to a situation where rational systems they define freedom to live world, a freedom that is necessary to allow a live world to grow to further maturity. Thus, in a way, for the Habermas, the colonization of the live world in modernity is its basic marker, and therefore he regards modernity as an unfinished project. So in that sense, when you talk about modernity, then we find that modernity is a kind of a concept, and over a period of time we find that new and new ideas and new changes which are coming in the society has brought about a lot of changes in the society at the social level as well. And Habermas says that the fully rational society, where rational system and life worlds can exist and express themselves satisfactorily. So when one is talking about this kind of a situation, at the moment such a situation does not exist, and the live world is greatly subdued and impoverished, and this is obstacle that has to be crossed over as well. And it does not mean a violent destruction of systems, economic or administrative, since they help in live worlds to rationalize their existence and ontology as well. So how is this going to be done? This requires that we examine relationship between system and the live world. And Habermas talks about the restraining barriers, how they should be erected, as you can see on the screen as well, to reduce the colonization of live world, and sensors should be used to make a greater impact of live world on the system. So in this manner, when you talk about two areas which are there, that is the live world and the system, they benefit each other greatly as well. So any kind of a restraining barrier should be there to reduce the colonization of the live world, because if we are going to colonize the live world in that sense, then we are going to destroy the world as well. And we also find that how sensors they are also important in this particular context as well. And Habermas also feels that until the above facts they assert themselves, modernity's project will take long to complete. And he is also of the view that modernity has much to offer and that we are not in a post-modern society as yet. So, this is what he talks about. He talks about the idea of modernity. He does not in a way see that the society has reached to an extent where it can be seen as post-modern in nature. And when one is talking about Habermas, that how he has criticized postmodernism on several grounds. So, we see that it is very difficult to objectively evaluate postmodernist because one is not sure whether that one is reading is social theory or literature. As you can see on the screen as well, that for Habermas it is very difficult to objectively evaluate the postmodernist because one is not sure whether what one is reading is social theory or literature. So, in that context, when one is trying to understand, then one is able to find that these kinds of ideas, they are very relevant to the society, and when one is trying to analyze them, then one has to see that postmodernism as a system or postmodernism as an idea does not is not there in the society for scholars like Habermas. And when one is talking about some kind of a former case and how the problems which they arise in the postmodernist erecting a formidable facade of jargon that is not in mainstream sociological knowledge. So, in that sense, hence one does not know where to classify such a theory. So, in that sense, we find that scholars, they have given their own ideas, they have debated these kinds of things within their own particular framework, they have given their own arguments to justify the kind of statements which they have given. And these kinds of sentiments, these normative sentiments, they are concealed from the reader as well sometimes, but nevertheless they offer normative critiques of the contemporary society. However, they are not exactly grounded and therefore not effective as well. And it has a totalizing tendency despite the fact that the postmodernists themselves are against this kind of a phenomena. And we find that the postmodernists, they ignore the facts of daily life as well. So, in a way, to criticize them, we find that the postmodernists are shut off from the very sphere of activity from which they derive themselves as well. And as you can see on the screen as well, that as such source of social data, an area of expression that is everyday life, is cut off from them. So, in a way, we have talked about the various kinds of approaches. We have in a way talked about the approaches of Giddens, and we talked about the approaches of the modernity given by Beck and Ritzer, and the idea of Habermas which was there. In all of them, they are trying to analyze these kinds of concerns within the framework of modernity and the kind of changes which modernity has brought about, and the various kinds of concepts which are associated with the postmodernists as well. And when one is trying to understand the modern world, as has been referred within the framework of the modernity, we find that modernity is a very dynamic kind of an approach, and we find that it is every day changing. And so, we cannot in a way situate modernity only in a very specific framework of time. Rather, this kind of an approach could be seen. And when one is trying to in a way summarize the kind of changes which have taken place over a period of time in the framework of the 19th, 20th century and thereafter, we find that tradition and modernity, they go together, and how they are relevant as well. And the kind of meaning which is being attached to modernity has been given by these scholars. They have given the constituents of the kind of ideas which are concerned with modernity, and how modernity from the positive and the negative point of view, how these kinds of aspects they are linked, that has also been talked about by these scholars. And so, with this I would like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.